The Macabre World podcast is brought to you by Darker Art Studio, home of real human bone jewelry. Stock and custom pieces are available, so visit us on the web at www.darkerartstudio.com and show them your darker art side. Macabre World, a podcast from Darker Art Studio, where we explore the dark, strange, and unusual from this world and beyond. Hello and welcome to the Macabre World podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Digati, and with me once again is Stephen Hawley Martin. Steve, thanks for coming on yet again, and he's going to be talking about his new book, which is called Help Create the Shift in Consciousness Needed to Save the World. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you so much, Rocky. I'm glad to be here again.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. Now, you have and folks can go to your website at www.shmartin.com and learn about some of your other books. We've talked about Death is Fiction, Fear and Illusion, and we've got how you developed your sixth sense, and so can you. And we've had some interesting conversations thus far. Tell me about the new book.
Well, the new book is I'm trying to solicit support for a TV series that we're working on, planning to create, and it's I've teamed up with a production company that does TV series for PBS television, and they're excited about it. And you were trying to raise some money and things like that, but we're pretty far along. We're figuring out the format and who we want to have on it and all that sort of thing. And the book really explains the concept of the TV series, and it also shares a lot of good information about what we're going to try to get across, which is basically that contrary to what you've been taught in school, consciousness is the ground of being, not matter or material substance. Material substance, matter doesn't produce consciousness. Consciousness produces matter. It's really the other way around. And that's why scientists have not been able to figure out how the brain creates consciousness, because, as a matter of fact, the brain does not create consciousness. The brain is a receiver of consciousness that certainly has an effect on what you see, hear, and believe, but everything comes through the five senses into your brain. But your consciousness, it comes from somewhere else as well, and so that's basically what we're trying to get across. Because I think the world is going to be a much better place when people realize that.
Well, we could definitely use a shot in the arm. I'll give you that for sure. Now, speaking of consciousness is one of those words that I think a lot of folks hear, and it means different things to different people. And people, sometimes try to adapt it to their spirituality. Sometimes people try to not adapt it to spirituality. And it can be a bit, when I think about, I'm a big fan of Einstein. And when I think about Einstein and I think about what he said about energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And I think about things like I grew up going to Catholic school, and I went, we talked about the eternal soul and things like that. And I think there's a lot of dogma that goes around the idea of eternal life and eternal consciousness, if you will. Would you say that this kind of falls in line with some of the things we know about having an eternal consciousness or an eternal energy?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say about Einstein, of course, his famous equation is E equals mc squared, which is that energy equals mass times the speed of light, mass and energy. And so really what he's saying is there is no actual matter as a lot of people think of it. It's all energy. And what I'm preaching is that it's energy that's conscious. And that in fact, there's really only one consciousness that we all share, but we think we have our own conscious just because of our egos that have been built up since birth. And because we have probably a subconscious mind, and even a soul, if you want to call it that, a higher self that's incarnated many times and has all that as part of it. But when you dig down deep enough, there's really only one consciousness. We're aspects of it, we're part of it. And if you meditate, you know what you can do? I think, and this is something I try to do a lot, is step back from your everyday awareness and kind of watch yourself. I call it the silent observer. And that is the one consciousness, the I am, the thing that we makes us feel that we are. And so again, we're whirlpools of consciousness that have come into this reality to experience, to learn, to grow, evolve, and it is a continuum. We are eternal. We're eternal beings that are on a physical situation here, but this is not the only time we're going to be here. And when we leave here, we'll go to the non-physical realm and team up with people that we've known before and our relatives who've gone before and so on.
Do you think that a lot of people have these experiences and either ignore them or explain them away? In other words, they're getting clues into the consciousness. And what are some of the types of things that everyday people experience that they are might be less likely to that they might explain away where they really should pay attention?
Well, there are lots of little things that happen if you pay attention to them. For example, have you ever had, or have your listeners and viewers ever had the feeling that someone, they were thinking about someone and then that person gave them a telephone call?
You've met my mother? Yeah, that happens. In fact, it happens frequently in my family. My mother, my sisters, we'll all, someone will be able to like, yeah, oh, I was just gonna call you. Oh my God, I was just picking up the phone to call you, and the phone rang, and we've all said it to each other.
Well, that's because there's a connection between you, and that's particularly true of family members and sisters and brothers and siblings, and also there's a study that comes to mind when I think about that, that's been done in England, where they've had video camera on a dog, and they didn't do it just with one dog, but video camera a dog, and then when his master gets off the bus to come home, the dog gets up and walks to the door to wait for him. Well, the dog didn't see him get off the bus. The dog picked up telepathically that the master was on his way. But there are other things. You have dreams about people, and sometimes they might be messages coming from the other side. I have a friend who had a very vivid dream about his father wanting to incarnate again, and he believes that his daughter is his father reincarnated. So, but it was a very kind of lucid dream. I'm sure there are other things. A lot of times when something happens to someone, either good or bad, you get a feeling about it. I remember once that I was in bed asleep, and my daughter, who at that time was about, I don't know, not a little older than a toddler, fell out of bed, and she was in a different bedroom. And I woke up and went into her room. It wasn't because I heard her. It was because I had some sort of a
I got to
psych.
check on her. Yeah.
Yeah, I got something's wrong here. And so those kinds of things happen. And what that's telling you is that your consciousness is not confined within your skull. Your consciousness is really non-local. It's everywhere.
It's what matters to your mind, so to speak.
Yeah, it's what matters. And you'll get messages, synchronicities where things happen that are, just at the right time, at the right moment. I had a friend who told me that he had just bought a brand new car, sports car, and he was going on a trip. And he got in the car to start it up and to go on the trip. And it was like a voice, and he said, check the oil. And he thought, well, this is a brand new car. Just drove it off the showroom. It's got to have oil in it. But it came again, check the oil. Well, he did. He checked the oil, and it was 2 quarts low.
Wow.
he could have ruined that car
Very
if he'd
much
gone
so.
on the ship.
Absolutely. For those of us who've ever been in a car that's thrown a rod, yeah, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, and I have.
Yeah, me too. We've all been, and it wasn't mine. It wasn't mine. But it's interesting. I know you've written on Edgar Casey, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't there a story with Edgar Casey that's very similar to that, where I think it was involving an elevator? He
Oh
was,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
What's
Edgar
the
Casey was in a department store, was waiting for the elevator. The elevator door opened, and he saw something. It was like black auras over the people, so he didn't get on. And that elevator, when it took off, the cables broke and it crashed to the basement, and everyone in the elevator was killed.
and that's tragic, and but it's amazing that he had, well, I guess the premonition or the sight, or he had whatever it was that the consciousness alerted him to, like, don't do it.
Yeah, yeah. And those sort of things happen. I have another friend who was driving his car and suddenly got the impulse to pull off. And what happened is there was a car coming around a curve that he'd have smashed into if he hadn't followed his impulse.
I always tell folks, I said, and this is just in general, you need to look behind you to see the near miss that you that you almost missed. I worked, for those folks who know me, I worked in EMS for many years. I worked in 911 EMS. And the amount of accidents you see, of course, in a job like that, it's your day to day. But you also are out and about and you see near misses all the time. You become hyper aware of that because you're waiting for something to happen. So you'll notice these things. And I think that it's interesting how many streams of consciousness, how many near misses do we have that
Well,
that
as
we're
an, as
that
an
we're
EMS person, you
avoiding?
probably saw a lot of people survive crashes that you didn't think would be possible.
I absolutely did. I
And that's called
always.
grace. You're from your Catholic upbringing,
Sure, a
bringing
state of grace. Yep.
it's grace where uh, I've talked to uh, state police who go to accidents. You say sometimes the car is so mangled you just don't see how they could have lived through it, and yet
They
they're
walk away.
yeah.
I don't
So
know how we got to get them out of there, but they walk away.
yeah, I'll tell you once a story about me that is absolutely grace working. And I was about 14 years old, and I was with some other boys. We were on what's called Petersburg Pike here in Richmond, Virginia, which goes between Richmond and Petersburg. It's Route 1, which used to be, and back when I was 14, was the main thoroughfare north and south. It's what 95 is now.
Sure.
And for some reason, I was with this group, darted across the street. It was at that point a 6-lane highway, 3 lanes going north, 3 lanes going south, and there was a median, grass median in the middle. Darted across, and I was hit by a car. And somehow I flew up in the air
Oh my goodness.
over the car and landed in the median on the grass. And the only thing I had was grass stains on my pants, and my shoes were about 50 feet
Yeah.
forward up on the highway there.
Very common with an impact. Yeah.
And I was, it was like angels or something lifted me up. I don't know how it happened. I should have been flattened and run over. Of course, all the cars screeched to a halt, and they almost ran into each other, back tail ended each other. And this one car came beside me, and he looked at me, and I kind of stood up and dusted myself off.
I
And
must have been horrified. Those guys have been terrified too.
so I don't know what happened, but anyway, that was grace. Whether it was angels or whether it's how the car caught my foot or what, I don't know, but it threw me up in the air and I was okay.
Now, not to play devil's advocate, and not to make that another pun, but not to play devil's advocate, but some might say, well, you have these lots of miraculous stories of people, coming out unscathed and having near misses. But then you have stories of people, young people, good people, people we admire, that seem to have inordinately uh not good luck. People
Yeah.
who die young in
Accident
accidents from
prone. Yeah.
illness, sure. and say, well, does it, if grace exists for some, shouldn't it exist for all of us? Or what's are we trying, is our egos trying to decide and meter out what is good and what is bad and who deserves and who does not? I
I
mean,
don't think I know the answer to that. The only thing I would guess is that there's, for most of us, I think there is a sort of life plan, and if you haven't accomplished it yet, I think you're more likely to not to experience grace and not be killed. Whereas if the person may have something going on that he or she doesn't even know about, that it's time for them, and maybe they need to get back there to the other side so they can come have a different life that may be better than the one they're experiencing. I don't know. That's just a wild
it's just
guess.
kind of it's just sort of like made me wonder, because I think, when most people are trying to sort it all out in our heads, is that, when you have this grace, or when you have these occurrences, there's a yang to it that isn't great. It
And I'll
isn't
say
great. It's
this too,
painful.
that it just occurred to me. Edgar Casey, of course, went into a trance. If people don't know who he was, he lived from 1877 to 1945. At the time he lived, he was known as the sleeping prophet because he would put himself into a self-induced trance every morning and every afternoon, and he would answer people's questions, most of which had to do with uh, illnesses that they had that doctors weren't able to help them with, and he would give them ways to cure that. He's known also as the father of what is it, herbal medicine or something
Hmm.
like that. But
Absolutely
a lot
holistic.
of
Yeah.
the questions that were posed to him were life questions. The meaning of life and what's it all about, Alfie. And one of the questions that he got a number of times was why a child had died, the crib death or something like that.
Sure.
And his answer was that basically that we plan our lives, and we come here for a reason. It could have been that the child was here to do that, to teach the parents something, or, and this is interesting, it could be that, and he said this, that the child changed his mind and decided that this was not the place for him. And so he went back where he came from.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I first heard about Edgar Casey. I want to say it was in when I read the Course in Miracles,
Uh-huh.
and that was years ago, many years ago,
Well,
and
Edward Casey was really something.
amazing stuff. Yes,
He he was a very staunch Christian. He was a Sunday school teacher. He belonged to the Presbyterian Church. And when things like reincarnation started coming through him in these trances, he stopped for a while because he didn't believe it. He had bought into Christian dogma that you only live once. And then he also read the Bible from cover to cover at least once every year. And so the next time he read the Bible through, he noticed that it's really reincarnations in there all through there, but they just don't call it that. Like for example, he said that John the Baptist was Elijah. Well, Elijah lived 400 years before John the Baptist. So if he was Elijah, he had to be the reincarnation of Elijah. And there are other examples like that.
and you go into that into your book and into the concept of reincarnation in Christianity, because I think a lot of us have, they kind of like set in compartments where, this particular religion, this is okay and that's not okay. If you're Christian, then certain things about fate are not okay, and then if you're in this religion, reincarnation is okay if you're Hindu, but it's not okay. There's a lot of I've often said, and this is probably going to get people writing me letters, but I'm okay with that. That I think that organized religion historically, how it's developed, was really just a way to try to explain the unexplainable, the things that we didn't understand. We didn't have quantum physics yet. And I think a lot of the basics and tenets, and that's not to say that they're simplistic or whatever, but I think they're an archaic explanation of a societal explanation to try to enforce a greater good and morality, you trying to explain things that at the time were not understandable.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of they're based on the culture and the what was known or what people thought they knew at the time. And my feeling about I believe that Jesus was an enlightened being who really understood what it's all about, and that if I were to explain what I'm trying to explain in my books to him, he would agree with it. But he was in a culture that believed that gods were like human beings. They were anthropomorphic. They were outside of their creation. And in fact, when Jesus lived, the concept of one God did not exist yet. I mean, the Jews had Yahweh, and the Philistines had Baal, and the Egyptians had Ra, and so on.
Well, the Egyptians
But
had a lot of them.
yeah, and the Greeks had a whole pantheon full.
Sure, and the Romans.
So,
Shouting
so
out that one from my dad. And the
absolutely,
Romans.
absolutely, they did. And so the idea of an external God was what people thought. So to tell them that consciousness is the ground of being and that we all share a single consciousness and one mind, but we think we're separate, that wouldn't have gone over. But really, if you read some of what Jesus is quoted as having said, that's what he was talking about. He said, "I and the Father are one," and he talked about the branches and the vine and all that. And what he's trying to communicate is, well, he said, "Whatever you do to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do to me." Well, that's because we're all one.
He addresses the collective. Well, I was fortunate enough to have been exposed to Vedanta at a young age through a family friend and my other mom. Hi, Karen. I hope you're listening. And she, one of the first things I remember that I asked about and that was written on the wall of the first time I went into the temple, which was it immediately affected me as a beautiful and serene and enlightened place. And Swamiji, who was the speaker, the head of it at the time, he was an amazing human. You felt his grace in the room. And it was palpable. But I remember that from the Bhagavad Gita was the truth is one, men call it by many names. And I've always thought about that and said, what if everybody's got a little bit of the right idea?
Yeah, well, I think that's true. And as far as Hinduism goes, I think I put it in this book that there's a quantum physicist who compares the Veda to the unified field of consciousness from which everything comes. And so what he's doing, he's agreeing with the Hindus' idea of how creation came about, except that he's putting a 21st century quantum mechanics language to it. So, I think that the rishis knew what they were talking about.
I have a feeling you are correct. And you mentioned something about dreams, and I've always found dreams fascinating from whether we go from like the whole Freudian thing to into the more concept of your dream self being like the umbilical soul attachment to your dream self and people who astral project in dreams. There's a lot going on with dreams that we go through the veil that we some people talk to deceased loved ones, and there's a whole lot that goes on once you close your eyes and once the cycle starts. So dreams, how are they connected to consciousness, do you think?
Well, I, there, I think you do what you said, that you go into this other realm when you dream. Often, I believe that dreams are your perhaps subconscious mind that's trying to wake you up about something.
And that's Freud. And there's Mr. Freud.
But
Except
I
he was a
think it
little
is.
twisted about it, but yeah, same idea.
I do think it's possible to talk with loved ones who've gone who've passed.
Oh, I hope so.
Dreams. I'll tell you a story about that. There's a woman that I interviewed a couple of times. Her name is Julie Bichelle, and she was a getting has a PhD in pharmaceuticals. And of course, in pharmaceuticals, they do a lot of double-blind testing
Sure.
to test the drugs. They put them with a placebo to see which ones are effective. And so that was her training. Well, her mother committed suicide, and
Oh,
so she wanted to find out whether her mother still existed, or whether, like the materialistic ideas that when you're dead, and that's it, over, nada, fini. Well, she started doing all these tests, double blind tests with psychics, and she's published papers, peer-reviewed papers that indicate that yes, psychics can deliver information that they couldn't get any other way. And one of the things I asked her was, well, did you have a psychic communicate with your mother, and did you talk with her that way? And she said, no, my mother came to me in a dream and explained what was going on, that she was all right, it was fine where she was.
I think a
So
lot of people, especially through the grieving process, have those dreams. I want to say is it Dr. Moody who
yeah,
does the psychomantium?
well, Doc Moody is the guy who wrote the book Life After Life, the first book, I guess, about near-death experiences. He's probably already done other. He's done a number of others.
Certainly.
There's
Reunions was the
Brian
one
Weiss, who
I was
does
recalling.
past life regressions and wrote the book Many Lives, Many Masters. He's a psychiatrist who was interviewing or talking with one of his patients, had hypnotized her and told her to go back to the time when her problem first started. And she went back to a life that took place 3,500 years ago.
That's amazing. Well, what do you think the culture is? Speaking of consciousness, I- when all of these concepts, like I remember as early as being, in the 70s, the first guy, I think the first thing I remember as a kid was the guy who bent spoons, Geller, Yuri Geller.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
had to think of him for a second, and these were like fringe concepts, and it was considered sort of like freaky and a little bit different, and it was considered like the kooky stuff. But do you think that the culture has changed, especially in the last, I'll say 50 years, from when how we receive and process these concepts like about Edgar Cayce, about reincarnation, about life after death, about near-death experience? Do you think I don't want to say normalized because I don't want to lend to because I don't think it's freakish at all. But me personally, I don't. But do you think it's become more mainstream? I think that's a better
I
way to say
do.
it.
I absolutely do. And I can see it in my own work. The first book I wrote on this topic and published was in 1995. And I got a lot of strong reactions from people saying, you're nuts. the
I've
last
heard that
one,
myself. I get it.
last one I published was on the subject of life after death, was back in July of this past year, and it's got a 4.5 star rating on Amazon. I mean, people don't. It used to be they'd inundate me with 1 star reviews because I was not. I was trying to tell them that their religion or their science was incorrect. Now I don't get any, hardly get any of that. I still get a little bit of it, but
That's how you know
I think
you're
it's
still being
twofold.
heard.
I think it's because of the internet and podcasts like yours
Thank you.
and YouTube channels that are into all of this and trying to get at the truth. I think it's also because there have been shows on mainstream TV. I haven't really watched them, but where they've got a psychic who's able to at least give the impression that he's psychic and does a great job of it. So I do think it's become more mainstream, as you
Well, I
say.
remember segments on news shows like I want to say like 2020, like the news magazine type shows. And one of the segments I remember, and I'm failing on the name, but I have a feeling you'll know the reference, is a very young boy who had an impression that he knew he was a fighter pilot, like,
Absolutely. Yeah, that was
and he
on ABC.
recognized his crew. ABC, yes,
It was on ABC, and it was the name of the boy is John Lininger. He's now in his early 20s, but this was around 20 years ago when he was born in 1998, I believe, and he was born to parents in Louisiana who were Baptists. And of course, they didn't believe in
sure.
reincarnation, but he started having nightmares, saying that his plane was on fire and he couldn't get out. And then I think his mother just accidentally took him to a air and space kind of museum where he saw a Corsair, and he said that he used to fly a plane like that. Anyway, long story short, they did a lot of investigation on him, and he had been a fighter pilot in World War II. He did fly Corsairs. He was shot down at Iwo Jima, the Battle of Iwo Jima, I think April of 1945, and he remembered the names of shipmates. He remembered the
Right.
name of the aircraft carrier he flew off, which was the Natoma Bay. His father took him to a reunion of the
It was a very moving part of that
men
broadcast.
from
Yes.
that carrier, and he recognized them. He said, "Oh, they're so old." That was like in the early 2000s. So, yeah, I mean, there's when you know that whole story, you can no longer question that reincarnation is real, because there's no other way that a 2-year-old and on up until he was about 6 could know all that.
It was an amazing story, and there have been, through the years, different stories and different news programs and different books that have gone into this sort of thing. One of the things that you talk about a little bit that all I can think of is the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, is the concept of remote viewing.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've interviewed two gentlemen who are remote viewers. One, his name is his nickname is Skip Atwater, and he set up the unit in the United States Army Intelligence during the 1970s and into the 80s. For about 10 years, he was head of it. And they had psychics spying on the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. And it was apparently very effective. So the other guy I met, Stefan Schwartz, is a remote viewer, and he does it for more like finding archaeological things. But he had taught a class for teaching people to be able to remote view. And that was in 2003. I talked to him about this. I interviewed him, I think it was in 2007 or 8 or 9, along in there. And he had 47 people in that class. They went through the whole course. At the end of the course, he had them remote view the capture of Saddam Hussein, which had not yet taken place. And he took all the information from the remote viewers, that's 47, and he put down on paper everything that kind of jived between them, and locked that up. And 6 weeks later, Saddam Hussein was captured, and about I don't know how many points checked out, that he was underground in I've forgotten the name of the town, but the name of the town, he had a lot of money with him. He had $750,000 in cash. He looked like a homeless person. I mean, there were a whole bunch of things, and they all checked out. So what
Amazing.
that says is that not only can you remote view what's happening now and what took place in the past, you can also see the probable future. So there is no time on the other side of or outside of this reality.
Well, you mentioned we've talked about some gifts that involved like ESP and things like that, and you've written on the subject extensively. But one of the things is that I think do you feel it's a misconception when people think that certain people are gifted? Do you think we all have the gift and not all of us are able to tap into it? Or do you think it is selectively parsed out in the population where only some of us have
What I
those
have been,
gifts?
and the people I've interviewed who are into all this, like Skip Atwater, he's he said that when they were recruiting for this unit of the army that was spying on the,
Did they call it psyops like in the movie? Gosh, I hope they did.
it's called Stargate is the name of his unit.
Stargate. Okay.
Stargate. You could Google that.
That's cool.
He said that anybody can do it with proper training, but they would look for certain personality types who didn't even know they were psychic, but they could be more easily trained than others, and that's who they recruited. They didn't go out and say, are you psychic? You want to come do this? They
Right.
found people they thought they could train to do it, and that's how
They
they
found the raw materials.
yeah, they found the raw material.
Well, I've
Uh,
often, talked with little kids. I think there's a lot of something to be said about as you grow up, you get more cynical, you get more jaded, you're told what reality, your reality is designed for you as you grow up by your parents and by
right.
your, by your, I should say, by your family, by your environment. And I think that I've noticed just from folks that I've talked to and things that I've observed, like that little boy who was young and didn't think anything of discussing his observations. He didn't know that it was preposterous to some that what he was saying. That I think that children, I think a lot of children, a lot of us, the younger we are far more open and we're far more connected, and that we lose that over time as we become jaded, cynical adults.
Well, you know what you're reminding me of is a poem by William Wordsworth that says, "The children come trailing clouds of glory," because they're closer to the other side, and they've just arrived from heaven, is what he's saying. But
Sure.
by the time, I've forgotten how the whole poem goes, but by the end, the idea is that they're jaded, like you said, that they've lost all that because of their environment.
Well, you certainly haven't. Your work is full of revelations and new and interesting information and very comprehensive as far as, and I think a very another part of it that makes it a great read is the historical implications and how it's fit in not just culturally but historically into
Yeah,
a lot of society.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And I hope people will go to my website, shmartin.com, and take a look at what I'm trying to do. And there's some books there that they might be interested in and they can find out more about. So
And they can learn how to develop their own ESP from your book as well, from
that's
the
right. ESP, how I developed my ESP, and so can you.
Yeah, and that's it. I think we could all use a little bit of advanced information. I think we all need to start paying a little bit more attention.
Right, right.
And I think there are, not to get overly preachy or political, but I think just in general, the idea of thinking of ourselves as part of a whole that's unified can only be better.
Oh, absolutely. Instead of being at each other's throats,
Correct.
maybe we could find some common ground and be nicer to each other.
It would be a welcome change. And you know what? It's folks like you and the folks that I talk to and the people that I meet along the way. And I think that if we all just pay a little bit of attention, we might be able to see where we fit into the whole. So what's next? Do you have any speaking engagements coming up? Where we're going to see you next? Tell us a little bit more about where we can look for news
I'm
on the TV show.
Well, just follow my website. I'll be posting things as we get along. I had a meeting this morning via Zoom with my two partners, the guys who own the production studio and called uh, goodallovertv.com if you want to find out more about them. And we're trying to we're shaking out how we're going to do a pilot, and we're trying to figure out the format and how it's going to work and what we want to include. That's where we are with it right now. But we're hoping to get it done certainly before the end of this year. Maybe something will be on TV this fall. We hope.
Well, that's what I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to be following you on www.shmartin.com. And folks, you need to go ahead and check out his books and definitely lend some support. And you know something? You really are going to learn something, even if you, and just speaking from if you've studied this stuff all your life or you've always had an interest in it and you think you've heard it all and seen it all, you've really come up with some unique adaptive ways for people to help understand where we can fit into all of this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rocky.
And thank you so much for having the time to come on and talk to everybody about that. And once again, that's shmartin.com. And the name of the new book is Help Create the Shift in Consciousness Needed to Save the World. Let's all go out and be good to each other. And remember, folks, stay kooky out there. Thank you for listening to Macabre World. You can find us on the web at www.darkerartsstudio.com.